Collin Childress is with us today, and prior to this, I think we just spent 20 minutes, 30 minutes talking about local youth soccer, which we all both have a great interest in. Now we get to talk about business. Thanks for joining us today, Collin. I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're really busy, especially as you have so much work internationally. Makes your hours very flexible depending on what part of the world you're talking to. So tell us a bit about what business you're in and what you do.
Absolutely. So my background comes in international business and legal, coming from both the legal and business side, entrepreneurial side. Worked in and been around sustainability and transformational management for most all my career. But came out, with specialization in international law and corporate law applications and understanding comparative law within South America and in those regions, but also having done work with information technology, ERP, governance systems in China, integration there with big technology companies, as well as privatization in Brazil. Early 2000s when oil and gas was privatized and the country was refinanced there with privatization funds. So what you're hearing about today with public-private partnerships and transformational management markets is where I've been, not just from a application standpoint, but also from a training and education standpoint for 15 years, and then going into business as an international entrepreneur with, as I would say, lawyer by necessity and businessman by trade approach that is taken, because I saw that as an approach being important because in dealing with developing markets globally, the high barriers to entry that are created for benefits within those markets that are tied to corruption and fraud, right? And so there was a need to be able to navigate those and see if there's a way to mitigate that altogether when it comes to bringing certain things like healthcare, which is where I've been focused in my career. They're starting with a British company here in Memphis, Smith & Nephew Orthopedics, and coming through the accelerated management development program there, and working with strategic planning, business development, the global strategy at the head office there in London, and so forth. And so my background's in Brazil and China, and I've spent most of the last decade plus in the Caribbean, which is actually more than just a paradisiacal tourism spot. We have the G5 there, and quite a diverse economic development situation, right?
Right.
So we've positioned, I've been positioned within the Virgin Islands, the U.S. territory there, for placement within that market. And along this process, we've worked in British territories, being the Turks and Caicos, went into that market and established what would be the first nearshoring operation for utilization of key opinion leading surgeons, and going in and establishing an orthopedic service line for that country when the British came in and reconstituted the market. So that's kind of what we do. And, going in and establishing these new, developing market level healthcare systems, bringing in the specialization and understanding how the cross-border transactional plays work, how the compliance and the regulatory and, the hurdles that exist in international business itself, which are significant, and how to navigate those. And then as we look on into what we're dealing with now, post pandemic, the situation there in the Caribbean, we had a kind of a test run for the pandemic when we had the largest hurricane system that's ever hit the Atlantic in 2018, right? With I think it was Maria, and there was two back-to-back 30 days of Cat 5 level storms in the region. So that gave some significant exposure to on how to prepare from a transformational management perspective in navigating within markets that are highly disruptive, right?
Right.
And so that's kind of where we're at now, coming full circle back into what would be medical tourism and positioning within markets largely tied to the Caribbean for medical tourism and some public health integration as well.
No, must be fascinating, trying to just deal with all those international changes and cross-border things. I mean, there's every country likes to be independent and have their own rules and regulations, and even within an area like the Caribbean or Caribbean, I can't even say Caribbean. I was brought up. I always used to tell people we found it, we named it, so it's the Caribbean, right? I mean,
it is.
So, I've never been able to get my mouth around it when it came here, so I just carry on calling it Caribbean. We're good. But I mean, even within those individual small nations that are within that, they all have their own independence and their own rules and regulations. So it's not like you as an individual can go there and it's across the Caribbean. It's going to be
right
from one island to the next. So those are some of the challenges must be enormous.
They are. I mean, it helps to be, a trained and licensed international attorney that can understand comparative laws, right?
Yeah.
Common law background is where we focus, and that largely leads into British overseas territories and common law based markets, because we have a real basis here in the U.S. obviously on the common law. But when you're dealing with more of your civil markets, there are applications that I would come in from an entrepreneurial standpoint and provide the general counsel and interplay between local counsel and our counsel for navigation. What we see on cross-border exchanges, payments, and other things now, just in this time, the last 10 years, we've seen, prior to entering the market, we saw major tax regulations coming into place, right? With FATCA, FAR, and other things,
Right.
having to navigate those processes, but then also seeing how digital currency is coming into play. Whether it's cryptocurrency or whether it's dealing with more digitalized payment systems,
Sure.
from a merchant banking standpoint.
Yeah. So I mean, all right. I mean, that's a pretty intense career choice that you have. You're based in Memphis. And
Yes.
so that by itself has got to be a challenge. I'm presuming you travel to these places on a regular basis.
I have. Now I will tell you this, with hurricane, then pandemic following 6 months, you have 2 years of hurricane disruption, right? So when the 2018 hurricane came in, the entire region was covered. So the Caribbean West Indies was basically taken offline for over 24 months, right?
Right.
Reintegration into that market, and then pandemic, right? So during that time, I worked with some of our emergency management folks here that have moved into the private sector to assess gaps in those markets for what would be payments to uplift those marketplaces, and where are the gaps existing in those disaster zones, right? I think in a post-pandemic market, we see more application of those needs when it comes to rapid response management and things like that are somewhat going to be inherent in what you see in new infrastructure and new management approaches to these markets. So that's where some of those, sometimes you hit the peaks and valleys along the process of being an entrepreneur, but as long as you're able to learn from those processes and apply them, to get a benefit from those and not be stopped from those processes, then there's value added there.
Yeah. So I mean, these in particular in the Caribbean, there's obviously a lot of potential for growth in there with their positioning, and basically been stuck around. They've been focused on tourism
right.
for some considerable time. Is that still a growing area? I mean, it's coming out of the pandemic. Is that a place that is going to continue to grow?
Absolutely. I mean, it is, from an international business standpoint, and from a legal standpoint, you're looking at one of the most diversified markets, especially the most diversified market that would be proximate to the US. There is, right?
Mm.
So you're talking about, G5 representation, multiple currency applications, and, developing, not even really emerging, not even, I would say developing markets completely that would allow for leapfrog technology applications coming in for development. So we're seeing a lot of money going in from the EU as well as now from the US post even delayed post hurricane funds
Right.
coming into those markets that would have application for new infrastructure, complete renewal of hospital infrastructure, and diversification of their economic models, right? Because when
Right.
you have a lot weighted on tourism,
Yeah.
then you have to start to bring in the healthcare and other things that can provide kind of a dual approach and dual revenue opportunities within those markets.
Markets. Yeah. Yeah. It's I think the Caribbean is always looked at as a tourist, but a relatively poor area
Right,
of
right.
of the Americas. Really, it's one of the poor areas, and everybody sees it that way. But it's just interesting to hear about the idea that they are getting themselves in a position where they can begin to be economically more sound and economically grow.
I think as you see, if one of my areas that probably that I've been even involved with longer than healthcare would be sustainability. And if you look at what some of the sustainability policies are, they're coming in from World Health Organization and from UN and from the US, DFC and other funders, right?
Right.
These funds are going to be coming in at a significant level
Right.
into these markets because there is, as you hear about, the social equity, the health equity, and those types of integration plays that are very apparent. And as we see the IMF taking refinancing there, and how those funds will be distributed and what's the basis of distribution, I think we see a lot of that going into the green infrastructure, that these countries have to have a self-sustainability when it comes to their healthcare systems, when it comes to their information technology infrastructures, when it comes to their energy, right?
Right.
How
Right.
does an island sustain energy, right?
Yeah.
And you would think it may be easy, but it's not.
Right.
Hurricanes don't play well with wind turbine renewable
Yeah.
energy technology.
Right. Yes. Very
You know,
true.
farmers are not that many farmers when you get to islands, and nor is there a limit of land, and food and shipping and logistics are very expensive.
Yeah.
So it's, how do you bring sustainable solutions into those markets that are going to support the health and well-being of that population? And is that really philanthropic or charitable applications? It's
Mhm.
not. This is the new capital markets, and new capital creation, whether it's natural capital, manufacturing capital, social capital, human capital, and
Right.
so
So do you think, I mean, this is what period of time are we looking at for that sort of growth in the Caribbean?
I think that as the trajectory we're on now, I think that we're looking at significant growth within those markets over the next 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
So near term growth, where you're seeing a lot of new infrastructure go into place, and that mix of diversification even going in at the small island level,
Yeah.
right? Look at Turks and Caicos, for example. There's diversification coming in on the finance sides, and not just big hotels going in with the paradisiacal settings, right?
Right. Right.
So, but you have renewal in Barbados. Barbados has taken sovereignty there, and you also have some of your central bank digital currencies that have been first tested in the Caribbean, in the Bahamas,
Yeah.
Barbados, and other areas, right?
Yeah. I think Jamaica's looking at taking sovereignty too. I think.
Yeah, they are. I think
Yeah.
it's a lot of times, you have to look at what the basis of that decision making process is.
Right.
And if they need to take sovereignty because potentially they may have such a debt load, right? And
Yeah.
there's a competing market there. It's right outside our back door. but the Chinese are very involved in the market and the infrastructure that has gone in place, and a lot of the lending that has taken place in the region.
Right.
So there's opportunity for the British and the Americans and the Canadians and others to compete, with that funding in the region when it comes to the renewables, when it comes to the health infrastructure, and it comes to the digital applications.
So, I mean, you mentioned, sustainability is a big deal here. So, I mean, traditionally, it's, let's say, boom and bust cycles within the Caribbean, usually related and built around the latest hurricanes. They rebuild, but the next hurricane comes along and infrastructure is once again destroyed. Is there a general movement towards getting better infrastructure that's able to survive these?
Absolutely, it's resiliency. Resilient infrastructure is the approach that's taken there, and so largely these infrastructures are going to be built at a Cat 5 level to support, right? But the resilient infrastructure is also tied to for example, if we're going in and promoting a hospital infrastructure, do we want that hospital to be wired for digital 5.0 type of infrastructures? Of course.
Yeah.
Right? Because in 2 years, you build or renew a hospital today, in 2 years, you're going to have that infrastructure there. And it costs a lot more, if not being simply impossible, to go into Cat 5 concrete walls to lay in digital infrastructure that you needed to lay in versus then. Yeah. So a lot of it is thinking forward.
I was going to say, so it's more forward thinking than in the past.
Right.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Break that cycle of I say boom and bust, but just building something up and having it knocked down again and building something.
Well, not just patching things, right? Not putting patches on it and saying, it has to be future proof, future fit. Yeah. And that's where the international funding, a lot of the funds that are sitting on the sides globally, whether it's in the US, London, or in the Middle East, there's interest there for putting in resilient infrastructure, sustainable systems.
Yeah, it's certainly that area, and I mean South America in general, just seems to be an area that is ripe for all sorts of innovation and innovative growth. And
absolutely,
yeah, it just seems like it's a great place. I mean, you say it's been built on tourism, so to wean themselves off that tourism and more into more sustainable type business. Attracting businesses to that area has got to be a big focus.
Absolutely. I mean, they have to have the diversification to be sustainable themselves, right? And so that's why the business opportunity, regardless of what term you use it as, right? What's the politically correct approach? Is it sustainability? Is it resiliency? Or is it just saying building smart infrastructure and diversification of your marketplace?
Right.
These markets are now, having those professionals that have been trained in the UK, the US, and others coming back. You have significant ICT infrastructure, information technology infrastructure that's gone in place because a lot of our cabling and other things route through the region. And you have, like I said, very diversified country level interest there. So it's kind of what we say, a little Model UN over there, right?
In a small area.
Yeah, in a small area that requires interoperability, and that's one of the things that we saw post hurricane. Was that a lot of the damages that continued to build up after the hurricane were because there was lack of interoperability.
Yeah,
and those damages just continue to accrue.
Right. Thank you for your time, Collin. I know we went way over what
originally scheduled. My pleasure.
So I appreciate talking to you about local soccer. It's always fascinating. It's really, really interesting to hear about what you do for a living. I mean, there's just so many different areas and so many different things that go on in this town, and so many people do great work, but nobody gets to hear about it because we're all caught up in the tragedy of the day or whatever. But there's just such a variety of things that happen in this town that people don't get to meet. So I appreciate your time. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Absolutely.
And good luck with the season.
Absolutely. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you. Bye-bye.